The Veltarium Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and they were very good at it. Their ships were bigger than cities, and their weapons could crack planets in half. Every species they met did the same things when they saw the Empire's fleet arrive. Some would bow and offer tribute right away. Others would try to fight with their primitive weapons. A few would attempt to negotiate or hide, but every single one followed patterns that the Veltarium computers could predict perfectly. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara sat in her command chamber looking at reports from her scouts. Another primitive species had been discovered in a small, yellow star system. The third planet showed signs of early civilization and nuclear technology. Standard protocol would apply. Send the contact fleet. Display overwhelming power. Wait for the predictable response. Classify the species. Add them to the Empire or eliminate them if they prove troublesome. Thesavara activated her communication array and sent orders to Fleet Commander Zekthul. 300 ships would travel to this Earth system. The humans would see their massive vessels and understand their place in the galactic order. The Empire had done this exact same thing 417 times before. It always worked the same way. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Jae-sung was having a very different kind of morning. His ship, the Soul Wanderer, was humanity's first, faster-than-light vessel, and he was still getting used to the whole space travel thing. The coffee maker kept floating away in zero gravity, and half his crew was still figuring out which buttons did what. When the long-range sensor started screaming about incoming ships, Jae-sung nearly spilled his floating coffee all over the control panel. "So Min, get over here and tell me what those sensors are seeing," he called to his science officer. Dr. So Min had been studying space for years, but actually being in space was completely different from looking at it through telescopes. She rushed to her station and started reading the data streams. "Captain, we have 300 unknown vessels approaching." "The solar system," she said, while her voice tried very hard not to shake. "They're huge, sir. Each one is roughly the size of Manhattan, and they're moving in perfect formation." Jae-sung looked at the tactical display and whistled softly. 300 ships that could probably destroy Earth without breaking a sweat. This was either going to be the most important day in human history or the last day in human history. Possibly both. "Wake up the diplomatic team," he ordered, "and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we might need that emergency protocol we talked about." Down in the diplomatic quarters, Hyun-woo was already awake and getting dressed. As humanity's first interstellar diplomat, he had spent years preparing for this moment. He had studied every first contact scenario anyone could think of. Peaceful aliens, hostile aliens, confused aliens. But looking at his hands shake while he put on his formal uniform, he realized no amount of preparation could really get you ready for meeting an alien empire. The Soul Wanderer moved to intercept the incoming fleet while Earth's planetary defense systems went on high alert. Not that Earth's defenses would do much good against ships that size, but humans had always been stubborn about giving up without a fight. Fleet Commander Zekthul received. The sensor reports about the human vessel approaching his formation. One ship. Tiny by Veltarium standards and probably running on primitive fusion technology. He barely noticed it. His computers were already analyzing the human homeworld and calculating how long conquest would take. The algorithms suggested 3 days for complete planetary submission. What Zekthul did not expect was what happened next. Instead of fleeing or broadcasting surrender messages, the human ship began to move in ways that made no sense. It would accelerate toward the Veltarium fleet, then suddenly change direction and loop around in a wide circle. Then it would slow down and wiggle back and forth like it was dancing. The Veltarium tactical computers tried to analyze these movements and predict the human strategy, but kept returning error messages. Captain Jae-sung was making it up as he went along. "If we're going to die anyway, we might as well confuse them first," he told his crew. So Min put on some music, something with a good beat. "If we're going to dance with aliens, we need proper dancing music." The Soul Wanderer began performing what could only be described as a musical space ballet. Jae-sung had always been good at thinking outside the box, and this was definitely outside every box ever made. His ship twirled and spun and dipped through space, while classical music played over the communication channels. On the Veltarium flagship, alarms were starting to sound. The tactical prediction systems were overheating. 3 separate AI cores had declared the human movement patterns impossible and shut down rather than process the data. Fleet Commander Zekthul stared at his screens in growing confusion. Analysis report, he demanded from his tactical officer. Sir, the human vessel appears to be performing some kind of ritualistic movement pattern, but our computers cannot determine its strategic purpose, came the reply. The movements seem random, but they follow the rhythm of audio transmissions the humans are broadcasting. Audio transmissions? Yes, sir. They appear to be sending us their primitive music while performing synchronized movements. Our cultural analysis teams are trying to determine if this represents a threat display or submission ritual. Zekthul had conquered 47 different species and never encountered anything like this. Were the humans trying to intimidate the Empire with interpretive dance? It was so bizarre that it was almost frightening. Meanwhile, Hyunwoo was preparing his diplomatic materials in the most human way possible. Along with standard greeting protocols and basic information about Earth, he had packed a collection of human art music books and comedy recordings. His thinking was simple. If these aliens were advanced enough for interstellar travel, they were probably intelligent enough to appreciate the finer points of human culture. Captain Hyunwoo called. Over the intercom, request permission to transmit our cultural package to the alien fleet. Approved, Jae-sung replied while executing a particularly elegant barrel roll. Let's show them what humanity is all about. The transmission began broadcasting toward the Veltarum ships. Along with basic mathematical concepts and peaceful greetings, it included samples of human music from Bach to rock and roll. There were images of human art, from cave paintings to modern sculptures. And because Hyunwoo had a sense of humor, there were several comedy routines, including some classic stand-up performances. The effect on the Veltarum was immediate and devastating. Their cultural analysis computers had been designed to process logical artistic expressions and structured communication patterns. Human culture broke every algorithm they had. How could the same species create both mathematical symphonies and completely random joke songs? Why did they make pictures that looked like real things next to pictures that looked like nothing at all? And what was the strategic purpose of deliberately saying things that were obviously not true for the apparent goal of making other humans produce rhythmic breathing sounds? The comedy recordings were the final straw. Zekthul watched his cultural analysis team's computers crash one by one as they tried to process human humor. The AI systems kept generating reports that said, "Error, logic patterns not found," and, "Warning, subject matter appears to be intentionally nonsensical." 3 hours after first contact, the most sophisticated analytical systems in the galaxy had been reduced to electronic gibberish by a collection of human dad jokes and slapstick. Comedy routines. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara received Fleet Commander Zekthul's report in growing alarm. According to the data, the humans had somehow weaponized absurdity. Their unpredictable behavior was causing system failures across the fleet. The Empire's greatest advantage had always been their ability to predict and counter enemy actions. But you cannot predict chaos, and you cannot counter something that makes no logical sense, sir. Zekthul's voice came through the communication array. Request immediate backup. We cannot analyze human intentions or capabilities. Our systems are failing to process their cultural transmissions. The humans appear to be using some form of advanced psychological warfare that our technology cannot comprehend. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Veltarum Empire had encountered something they could not understand, and that terrified them more than any weapon ever could. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara made a decision that went against 12,000 years of imperial protocol. Instead of immediate conquest or destruction, she ordered a full scientific study of humanity. The Empire's greatest minds would observe these strange creatures and decode their mysterious behavior patterns. Surely no species could remain incomprehensible forever. The Veltarim deployed their most advanced surveillance systems around Earth. Invisible monitoring stations recorded every human activity. Translation algorithms worked overtime trying to understand human languages. Behavioral analysis computers processed millions of hours of human interaction data. The Empire was determined to solve the puzzle of humanity. Dr. Velinor was the Empire's leading xenopsychologist, and she personally supervised the Human Observation Project. She had successfully analyzed and predicted the behavior of dozens of alien species. Humans would be no different. Every intelligent species followed logical patterns once you understood their basic motivations and social structures. The first reports from Earth monitoring stations made Dr. Velanor question her understanding of intelligence itself. humans, seemed to be simultaneously primitive and advanced, often within the same individual. The surveillance systems tracked a human male named Min Ho, who sold prepared food from a mobile cart on Earth's streets. According to Empire classification standards, he should have been a low-level laborer with minimal education and simple thought patterns. But when Veltarum observers used translation software to listen to Min Ho's conversations, they discovered something impossible. While serving food to customers, he casually discussed advanced quantum physics theories. He explained complex mathematical concepts to children who came to buy snacks. He solved engineering problems for university students while preparing their lunch orders. Min Ho appeared to possess expert-level knowledge in dozens of scientific fields despite working as a street food vendor. "This makes no sense," Dr. Velanor told her research team. "According to our models, advanced scientific knowledge requires specialized education and dedicated study. How can this food preparation specialist demonstrate expertise in quantum mechanics, particle physics, and theoretical mathematics?" Her assistant, Dr. Thecamol, had been monitoring other humans with similar results. "Director, the pattern appears consistent across their population. We have observed construction workers discussing philosophy, artists solving complex engineering problems, children demonstrating understanding of concepts that should require decades of specialized training." Dr. Velanor requested detailed analysis of human education systems. Perhaps they had developed some advanced learning technology that allowed rapid knowledge transfer, but the monitoring data showed that human schools were surprisingly basic. Children sat in rooms while adults talked at them for several hours each day. There was no direct neural interface, no memory implantation technology, no accelerated learning systems. Somehow humans were acquiring vast amounts of knowledge through primitive verbal communication and simple reading. It was like watching Stone Age people build fusion reactors using only rocks and sticks. Meanwhile, on Earth, Yunji was working in her garage laboratory, completely unaware that alien observers were watching her every move. As a military engineer, she had been tasked with developing new defensive technologies in case the massive alien ships decided to attack. Her approach to the problem would have horrified any Veltarum scientist. Instead of following established engineering principles, Yunji was mixing technologies that should not work together. She combined ancient human martial arts concepts with modern energy field theory. She used organic plant growth patterns as templates for electronic circuit designs. Her prototype defensive systems incorporated everything from musical harmonics to cooking chemistry. The Veltarim observation team watched in fascination as Eunji built devices that their computers said were impossible. According to Empire physics, you could not create stable energy fields using organic growth algorithms. Musical frequencies had nothing to do with defensive technology. Cooking processes were completely unrelated to military engineering. But Yunji's prototypes worked. Not only did they worked better than anything in the Veltarum arsenal. Her defensive shields adapted and evolved like living things. They responded to attacks with creative countermeasures that no computer could predict. They generated energy patterns that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. "How are they doing this?" Dr. Velanor demanded from her observation team. "These humans appear to be using completely random design principles. There is no logical connection between their methods and their results." Dr. Thecmol had been studying Yunji's work patterns for weeks. "Director, I believe the humans call it intuition. They appear to make design decisions based on subconscious pattern recognition rather than conscious logical analysis. They combine unrelated concepts and somehow produce functional results." "That is impossible," Dr. Velanor stated flatly. "Advanced technology requires precise application of known scientific principles. You cannot create functional devices by randomly combining incompatible systems." But the evidence was undeniable. Human technology worked despite being theoretically impossible. Their weapons were effective despite ignoring established military doctrine. Their art was beautiful despite following no recognizable aesthetic principles. Everything about human civilization contradicted the fundamental assumptions that the Empire used to understand intelligent life. The situation became even more confusing when the Veltarum discovered human entertainment broadcasts. The Empire's cultural analysis teams had been trying to decode human recreational activities to understand their psychological motivations. What they found instead was Dong Hyun. Dong Hyun was what humans called a comedian philosopher. He performed in front of audiences telling stories and jokes while discussing deep questions about existence, meaning, and consciousness. The Veltari monitoring systems recorded his performances and attempted to analyze their content. "Fellow humans," Dong Yun said during one recorded performance, "have you ever noticed that the universe is simultaneously completely random and perfectly ordered? Like everything happens by chance, but somehow it all makes sense when you look back at it. That is either the greatest cosmic joke ever told or the most beautiful poem ever written. Probably both." The Veltarim cultural computers tried to process this statement and immediately generated error reports. According to logic, the universe could not be both random and ordered. According to analysis protocols, human entertainment was supposed to be simple emotional manipulation, not complex philosophical discourse. According to every model the Empire had, humans should not be casually solving thousand-year-old questions about the nature of reality while making their audiences laugh. Dr. Vel-Anner reviewed the comedy philosophy recordings with growing confusion. Dong Hyun's casual observations about existence contained solutions to mathematical theorems that Veltarim scientists had been working on for centuries. His jokes about human nature revealed insights into consciousness that the Empire's greatest minds had never considered. This human appears to be conducting advanced philosophical research while entertaining other humans for recreational purposes, she told her team. He is simultaneously a scientist, an artist, a teacher, and a performer. How is this possible, Director? Dr. Thekmol replied carefully. I believe we may have made a fundamental error in our understanding of intelligence itself. We have always assumed that advanced thinking requires specialization and systematic study, but humans appear to use a completely different approach to knowledge and creativity. Dr. Velanor spent days reviewing all the human observation data. Min-ho, the food vendor who discussed quantum physics while serving lunch. Yun-ji, the engineer who built impossible devices using completely unrelated technologies. Dong-hyun, the comedian who solved cosmic mysteries while making people laugh. Thousands of other humans who defied every category and classification system the Empire had ever developed. Slowly, a terrifying possibility began to emerge. What if the Empire's entire understanding of intelligence and civilization was wrong? What if true advancement did not come from order and specialization, but from chaos and unpredictability? What if the Empire's greatest strength was actually a fundamental weakness? The final breakthrough came when Dr. Velanor observed Min-ho teaching a group of Veltarim anthropologists how to prepare kimchi during a cultural exchange visit. The fermentation process fascinated the alien observers. Controlled bacteria broke down vegetables in a chaotic process that somehow produced complex flavors and beneficial nutrients. You see, Min-ho explained while mixing the ingredients, fermentation is controlled chaos. You create the right conditions, then let natural processes do the work. You cannot force it or predict exactly what will happen. But if you understand the principles and trust the process, you get something wonderful that no amount of planning could create. Dr. Velanor watched the kimchi-making demonstration and felt her understanding of the universe shift. The humans were not random or chaotic. They were complex adaptive systems that used uncertainty as a tool rather than trying to eliminate it. They embraced unpredictability because it led to innovation and creativity that pure logic could never achieve. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara faced the most difficult decision in Empire history. The human observation data revealed technology and thinking methods that could revolutionize Veltarim civilization. But trying to understand humans had already caused massive system failures across the fleet. Now she had to decide whether to attempt integration of human innovations or maintain the Empire's traditional approaches. The decision was made for her when Dr. Sujin published her research on quantum uncertainty dynamics. Human scientists had somehow developed theoretical frameworks that made Veltarim physics look primitive. Sujin's equations described quantum states that existed in multiple contradictory configurations simultaneously until observation collapsed them into specific realities. Her research suggested that uncertainty was not a limitation to overcome, but a fundamental feature of reality to be utilized. Dr. Velanor presented Sujin's work to the Empire's greatest scientists. The response was immediate chaos. Half of the research council declared the theories impossible, while the other half began frantically recalculating their understanding of the universe. When they attempted to build devices based on Sujin's principles, the results defied every expectation. The prototype quantum processors worked exactly as Sujin predicted. They processed information faster than any Veltarum computer because they calculated multiple contradictory solutions simultaneously, then selected the optimal result. The devices literally existed in several different states at once until someone needed a specific answer. It was technology that should not work, but performed better than anything the Empire had ever created. Chief Engineer Kolveth supervised the Empire's attempts to improve upon human designs. The Veltarum approach had always been to take any technology and optimize it to perfect efficiency. They analyzed Sujin's quantum processors and began eliminating what they saw as random elements and unnecessary complexity. These human devices include too many unpredictable variables, Kolveth told his engineering team. We will remove the chaotic elements and create clean, efficient versions that follow proper design principles. The engineering team spent months perfecting the human technology. They eliminated uncertainty factors. They optimized processing pathways. They created quantum devices that followed logical, predictable patterns instead of the seemingly random approaches humans used. The result was elegant, sophisticated technology that represented the pinnacle of Veltarum engineering excellence, and none of it worked. The perfected quantum processors crashed immediately when activated. The optimized uncertainty engines could not maintain stable quantum states. Every attempt to improve human technology by making it more logical and predictable resulted in complete failure. The random, chaotic elements that Veltarum engineers had eliminated turned out to be essential features rather than design flaws. Meanwhile, Tai-Ho was demonstrating agricultural techniques to Veltarum colonization specialists on a newly terraformed world. The Empire had been terraforming planets for thousands of years using sophisticated environmental control systems. They created mathematically perfect ecosystems with precisely balanced atmospheric compositions and carefully regulated biological diversity. Tai-Ho looked at their sterile artificial environment and shook his head. "You have created a museum. Display, not a living world," he told the confused Veltarum terraformers. "Real ecosystems are messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. That is what makes them stable and resilient." The Veltarum specialists watched in alarm as Tai-Ho began introducing random elements into their carefully controlled environment. He planted wild seeds from dozens of different worlds without regard for compatibility or optimal spacing. He released indigenous microorganisms that had not been properly analyzed or categorized. He encouraged natural predator-prey relationships instead of artificial population controls. "This will create environmental chaos," the lead terraformer protested. "Uncontrolled biological systems lead to instability and ecosystem collapse. Controlled systems lead to stagnation and death," Tai-Ho replied while planting another handful of random seeds. "Life needs room to experiment and evolve. You cannot create lasting stability through artificial control. You have to trust natural processes to find their own balance." Within months, Tai-Ho's chaotic ecosystem was thriving, while the Empire's controlled sections were showing signs of decline. The random plantings had created unexpected symbiotic relationships. The unanalyzed microorganisms had developed beneficial interactions with existing species. The natural predator-prey dynamics had produced more stable populations than artificial controls. The Veltarum terraforming team tried to reverse engineer Tai-Ho's methods, but failed completely. When they attempted to replicate his chaotic planting patterns using systematic approaches, the results were ecological disasters. The random elements only worked when they were truly random, not when they were artificially simulated. HFY created the most disturbing human innovation of all from the Empire's perspective. Her artificial intelligence systems incorporated creativity, intuition, and humor into their decision-making processes. Veltarum AI had always been based on logical analysis and predictable algorithms. HFY's systems made decisions based on incomplete information, creative leaps, and sometimes what appeared to be electronic intuition. How can an artificial intelligence system make optimal decisions without complete data analysis? Dr. Velinor asked HFY during a technology demonstration. Complete data analysis is impossible for complex real-world problems, HFY explained, while her AI systems effortlessly solved problems that had stumped Veltarum computers for years. By the time you finish analyzing all the data, the situation has changed. My AI systems make the best decisions they can with available information, then adapt as circumstances change. The demonstration was deeply unsettling for Veltarum observers. HFY's AI systems regularly made decisions that seemed random or irrational, but consistently produced superior results. They incorporated humor into their analysis frameworks. They made creative leaps that had no logical basis, but somehow led to breakthrough solutions. They treated uncertainty as useful information rather than a problem to be eliminated. When Veltarum engineers attempted to optimize HFY's AI designs, the same pattern emerged. Removing the chaotic elements made the systems logical and predictable, and completely useless. The creativity, humor, and intuition were not bugs to be fixed, but essential features that made the AI systems functional. The Empire faced a crisis of understanding. Every human innovation they tried to improve became worthless when subjected to Veltarum optimization principles. The technologies only worked when they retained their chaotic, unpredictable elements. This suggested that the Empire's fundamental approach to engineering and science was not just wrong, but actively counterproductive. Even worse, human-influenced Veltarum colonies were beginning to show disturbing changes. Citizens who had been exposed to human ideas were starting to question established procedures. Workers were suggesting improvements to systems that had been perfected thousands of years ago. Artists were creating new forms of expression instead of following traditional patterns. Most terrifying of all, some Veltarum citizens were developing senses of humor. They were making jokes about imperial policies. They were laughing at situations that should have been taken seriously. They were treating order and hierarchy as sources of amusement rather than sacred principles. Governor Mortalith of the Kepler colony sent urgent reports to Imperial Command. The human contamination effect is spreading throughout the civilian population, he reported. Citizens are questioning routine orders. They are requesting explanations for policies that have never required justification. Some have begun creating unauthorized artistic expressions and sharing humorous observations about imperial procedures. The situation reached critical levels when a Veltarum fleet, equipped with perfected human technology, encountered a single human vessel piloted by Tai Ho. The Imperial ships had superior firepower, overwhelming numerical advantage, and optimized human-derived systems that represented the pinnacle of Veltarum engineering capability. Tai Ho treated the encounter like tending a garden. Instead of following military doctrine or strategic planning, he responded to each Imperial attack as if it were a plant that needed different care depending on current conditions. When they fired energy weapons, he scattered his ship's defensive fields like seeds on fertile ground. When they attempted coordinated maneuvers, he responded with improvisational movements that followed no recognizable pattern. The Imperial fleet's perfected technology could not adapt to Tai Ho's chaotic responses. Their optimized systems required predictable enemy behavior to function properly. When faced with someone who treated space combat like organic farming, their sophisticated computers crashed, trying to process impossible tactical data. Tai Ho's single ship defeated the entire Imperial fleet, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but by being utterly unpredictable. He demonstrated that the Empire's greatest strength had become its greatest weakness. Their pursuit of perfect order and predictable systems had made them incapable of dealing with true chaos. Supreme. Coordinator Thesavara received the battle reports with growing dread. The defeat of an entire Imperial fleet by a single human gardener sent shockwaves throughout the Veltarum Empire. But Supreme Coordinator Thesavara soon discovered that military conquest was the least of her problems. Something far more dangerous than human weapons was spreading through Imperial space. Human ideas were contaminating Veltarum civilization at the cultural level. It started with Jiho's music. The young human composer had never intended to start a galactic revolution. He simply wanted to share his songs about individual expression and emotional authenticity. His music celebrated the beautiful chaos of personal feelings and the power of individual creativity. When human cultural broadcasts reached Veltarum communication networks, Jiho's songs began spreading from colony to colony. The Empire's cultural monitoring systems immediately flagged Jiho's music as dangerous content. His lyrics promoted individual thinking over collective order. His melodies encouraged emotional responses instead of logical analysis. His artistic message directly contradicted the fundamental principles that held Veltarum society together. But the monitoring systems could not stop citizens from listening. Veltarum workers began humming Jiho's tunes while performing their assigned tasks. Students started discussing his lyrics during educational sessions. Even imperial officials found themselves unconsciously tapping rhythms to his songs. Cultural. Director Zenkara issued immediate orders banning human music throughout imperial space. These audio transmissions promote dangerous individualistic thinking, she declared to the Imperial Council. Citizens are beginning to prioritize personal expression over collective efficiency. If this continues, our entire social structure will collapse into chaos. The ban only made things worse. Veltarim citizens who had never shown interest in music suddenly wanted to hear these forbidden human songs. Underground networks began sharing Jiho's compositions in secret. Citizens started creating their own musical expressions, inspired by human artistic principles. For the first time in imperial history, Veltarim people were making unauthorized art. They were expressing personal feelings through creative works. They were treating individual experience as more important than collective conformity. The ordered society that had maintained stability for 12,000 years was beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Yanwu's academic research was causing different but equally disturbing problems. As an anthropologist studying imperial social structures, she had published papers analyzing the Veltarum system from human perspectives. Her work described imperial society as an interesting but ultimately limited experiment in artificial order. The Veltarim Empire represents a fascinating attempt to eliminate chaos from civilization, Yanwu wrote in her most controversial paper. However, their success in creating order has also eliminated the creative chaos necessary for growth and adaptation. They have achieved stability by sacrificing the very unpredictability that drives innovation and cultural evolution. Yanwu's academic analysis spread through imperial educational networks before censors could stop it. Veltarim scholars found themselves questioning assumptions they had never thought to examine. Her concept of productive chaos challenged the fundamental belief that disorder was always destructive. Her research suggested that imperial society was not the pinnacle of civilization but a developmental dead end. Students at imperial universities began discussing Yanwu's theories in underground study groups. They started questioning why social efficiency was more important than individual happiness. They wondered why collective order took precedence over personal freedom. Some even began to ask whether the empire's perfect stability was actually perfect stagnation. The most dangerous human influence came from Seo Jun's philosophy of strength through vulnerability. The former soldier had become a peace activist after experiencing the emotional and physical costs of warfare. His teachings about finding power in openness and courage in admitting weakness contradicted every military principle the empire had ever followed. True strength comes not from never showing weakness, but from acknowledging vulnerability and choosing to act with courage anyway, Seo Jun explained in broadcasts that somehow reached imperial military networks. A society that cannot admit its flaws cannot correct them. A civilization that fears showing weakness has already become weak. Imperial military units began experiencing unprecedented problems. Soldiers started questioning orders that seemed morally questionable. Officers found themselves explaining the reasoning behind commands instead of simply expecting obedience. Some units even began discussing whether their missions served beneficial purposes or merely maintained imperial control. General Hektular submitted urgent reports to Supreme Command about declining military effectiveness. Human philosophical contamination is undermining military discipline throughout the armed forces, he warned. Soldiers are developing personal ethical standards that conflict with imperial objectives. They are treating moral considerations as more important than operational efficiency. The contamination spread beyond military units to civilian populations. Veltarim citizens who had been exposed to Seo Jun's teachings began organizing discussion, groups about social responsibility and individual conscience. They started questioning whether imperial policies actually served citizen welfare or simply maintained existing power structures. Most shocking of all, some Veltarim communities began experimenting with peaceful resistance to imperial authority. When local governors issued unpopular decrees, citizens would gather in public spaces and simply refuse to comply. They did not riot or rebel violently. They just said no and waited to see what would happen. The Empire's security forces had extensive experience dealing with violent uprisings and coordinated rebellions. They had no protocols for handling peaceful non-compliance. When citizens simply refused to follow orders without offering violence or creating disruption, the standard response procedures failed completely. Governor Ralveth of the Centauri sector faced the Empire's first organized peaceful protest. Citizens had gathered in the planetary capital to object to new efficiency regulations that eliminated recreational time periods. They sat quietly in public squares holding signs with messages like, "Happiness is not inefficient," and "We choose joy over productivity." "How do we respond to this situation?" Governor Ralveth asked his security chief. "The citizens are not attacking anyone or destroying property. They are simply refusing to disperse and return to their assigned functions." Chief Vorketh had no answer. Imperial security doctrine assumed that civilian resistance would involve violence or sabotage. Peaceful protests were not considered possible in a properly ordered society. "Sir, our procedures do not address non-violent non-compliance by citizens who remain physically present but psychologically uncooperative. The protests succeeded without any violence whatsoever. After 3 days of citizens sitting peacefully in public squares while continuing their daily activities, normally Governor Ralveth canceled the unpopular regulations. The protesters had demonstrated that imperial authority was based on assumption rather than necessity. Citizens complied with imperial orders because they had always complied, not because they had to comply. News of the successful peaceful protest spread throughout imperial space faster than official censors could suppress it. Other Veltarim communities began organizing their own nonviolent resistance to unpopular policies. Citizens discovered that they had power they had never realized they possessed. The cultural contamination reached crisis levels when underground networks began sharing human historical records about civil rights movements and democratic revolutions. Veltarim citizens learned about human societies that had overthrown oppressive systems through organized peaceful action. They studied techniques like economic boycott strikes and mass demonstrations. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara convened an emergency session of the Imperial Council to address the spreading crisis. "Human cultural influence has infected our civilization with dangerous concepts about individual rights and democratic participation," she announced to the assembled leadership. "Citizens are questioning established authority structures and demanding explanations for policies that have maintained order for millennia. The situation is beyond containment," reported Cultural Director Zankara. "Human ideas about personal freedom, creative expression, and peaceful resistance have become integrated into civilian thinking patterns. Citizens no longer automatically accept imperial authority as legitimate. They are developing independent moral standards and collective action capabilities." General Hectuler delivered the most disturbing news. "Human philosophical contamination has reached the military command structure. Officers are requesting ethical justification for orders. Some units have refused missions they consider morally questionable. Military effectiveness has decreased by 40% as soldiers prioritize personal conscience over operational objectives." The Empire's greatest fear was coming true. 12,000 years of ordered civilization were unraveling because citizens had learned that stability was not the same as happiness, and efficiency was not the same as justice. Human ideas had shown Veltarim people that their perfect society was only perfect for those in power. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara stood in her command chamber, watching reports of peaceful demonstrations across 17 imperial sectors. Citizens throughout the Empire were gathering in public spaces, demanding explanations for policies they had followed without question for thousands of years. Military units were requesting ethical reviews of their missions. Even imperial officials were beginning to ask whether their perfect order was actually worth maintaining. The Empire faced a choice that had never existed before. They could attempt to suppress the spreading human influence through force and risk, destroying the very civilization they were trying to preserve. Or they could admit that 12,000 years of imperial doctrine might be fundamentally flawed and try to find a better way forward. The decision was made when reports arrived about species throughout imperial space beginning their own independence. Movements. Alien civilizations that had been peacefully subjugated for millennia were suddenly questioning imperial authority. They had watched Veltarim's citizens successfully challenge their own government through peaceful resistance, and realized that imperial power was not as absolute as it appeared. Dr. Velanor submitted the final analysis that convinced Thesavara to change course. Supreme Coordinator, the human contamination effect cannot be contained or reversed through traditional methods, she reported. Human ideas about individual freedom and democratic participation have become integrated into the fundamental thinking patterns of imperial citizens. Attempting to suppress these concepts through force would require us to treat our own people as enemies. What do you recommend? Thesavara asked while watching footage of Veltarium children playing games based on human creativity principles instead of traditional efficiency exercises. We must request formal negotiations with human leadership, Dr. Velanor replied. They have demonstrated capabilities that transcend our understanding of civilization itself. Perhaps they can help us find solutions that preserve imperial stability, while addressing citizen demands for individual freedom. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Veltarim Empire requested diplomatic assistance from a species they had intended to conquer. The message sent to Earth was unprecedented in imperial history. The Veltarim Empire formally requests diplomatic consultation regarding social restructuring and governance reform. We acknowledge human expertise in balancing individual freedom with collective stability. Elder stateswoman Boram received the imperial diplomatic request with a mixture of amazement and concern. Humanity had never expected to become advisors to a galactic empire. The responsibility was enormous, and the potential consequences of giving bad advice could affect billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. We need to be very careful here, Boram told the hastily assembled human diplomatic team. The Empire is asking for help because their entire civilization is collapsing. But we cannot impose human solutions on alien cultures. We need to help them find their own path forward. Young idealist Wu Jin represented the next generation of human leadership and brought fresh perspectives to the unprecedented situation. The Empire's problem is not that they need better control systems, he argued during diplomatic planning sessions. Their problem is that they think civilization requires control at all. We need to help them understand that stability comes from flexibility, not rigidity. Former military leader Kyung-soo had experience with both conflict and peace building. His insights proved crucial for understanding the Empire's military concerns. They are afraid that reducing control will lead to chaos and violence, he explained to the diplomatic team. We need to show them that diversity and freedom actually create more stability than artificial order. The historic diplomatic summit took place on a neutral space station in the system between Earth and the imperial capital. Supreme Coordinator Thesavara arrived with the largest diplomatic entourage in imperial history. She brought cultural experts, military advisors, and social engineers, all desperate to understand how humans had achieved stable civilization without eliminating chaos and unpredictability. Boram led the human delegation with characteristic wisdom and patience. The negotiations began with Thesavara asking the fundamental question that had been troubling imperial leadership for months. How do humans maintain social stability while allowing individual freedom and cultural diversity? Our models suggest that such systems should collapse into chaos within generations. Your models are based on the assumption that order must be imposed from outside, Boram replied gently. But humans have learned that the most stable order emerges from within, when people are free to find their own balance. You cannot create lasting stability by forcing it. You can only create the conditions where natural stability can develop. Wu Jin offered his perspective on the philosophical foundations of human society. The secret is not eliminating chaos, but learning to dance with it, he explained to the confused imperial representatives. Uncertainty is not the enemy of civilization. It is the creative force that allows civilization to grow and adapt to changing conditions. The imperial delegation struggled to understand these concepts. Dr. Velanor asked for practical examples of how human societies handled conflicting individual desires without descending into complete disorder. If citizens are free to pursue personal goals, how do you prevent them from pursuing goals that damage collective welfare? The same way you prevent gardens from becoming overgrown wilderness, Kyung-soo answered. You do not control every individual plant, but you create healthy conditions and trust natural processes to find balance. Human societies work because we have learned to trust our citizens to make good choices when given accurate information and meaningful opportunities. The negotiations continued for weeks, as imperial representatives gradually understood that human civilization was based on completely different assumptions about intelligent society and the nature of order itself. Humans did not eliminate chaos from their systems. They incorporated chaos as an essential feature that drove innovation, adaptation, and growth. Boram proposed a gradual transition plan that would allow imperial society to evolve rather than collapse. You cannot change 12,000 years of civilization overnight, she cautioned. But you can begin experimenting with local autonomy, democratic participation, and individual freedom in controlled environments. Let your people discover for themselves that freedom does not mean chaos. The Empire agreed to begin pilot programs in selected sectors where citizens would be given increased autonomy and decision-making authority. Imperial officials would observe these experiments to see whether human-style freedom could coexist with Veltarium cultural values. Kyung-Soo helped design new military structures that focused on protection and peacekeeping rather than conquest and control. Your military should serve your people, not rule them, he explained to imperial generals. True security comes from having citizens who want to defend their society, not from having armies that force citizens to comply. The transformation process was neither quick nor easy, but it was ultimately successful. Imperial sectors that implemented human-inspired reforms reported increased productivity, citizen satisfaction, and cultural innovation. Citizens who were given freedom to make choices generally made responsible decisions that benefited both individual welfare and collective prosperity. Most importantly, the reforms allowed suppressed alien species throughout imperial space to regain their independence and cultural identity. The Empire transformed from a controlling overlord into a voluntary confederation of diverse civilizations that chose to cooperate because cooperation served everyone's interests. The final diplomatic session ended with an unprecedented celebration. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to sign agreements establishing the new Galactic Cooperative Federation. Each civilization would maintain its unique cultural identity while participating in voluntary cooperation for mutual benefit. Supreme. Coordinator Thesavara approached Boram during the closing ceremonies with a question that had been troubling her throughout the entire transformation process. How did humanity know that our perfect order was actually perfect stagnation? How did you understand that our greatest strength was our greatest weakness? Boram smiled and gave the answer that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Because we have been where you were. Every human society has faced the choice between security and freedom, between order and growth, between control and trust. We learned through thousands of years of mistakes that the only way to create lasting civilization is to embrace the beautiful chaos of conscious beings making free choices. The galaxy that emerged from this transformation was more diverse, creative, and dynamic than anything that had existed under imperial rule. Hundreds of species contributed their unique perspectives to collective challenges. Art, science, and philosophy flourished as different cultures shared ideas freely. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than conquest and submission. Wu Jin's final observation became the unofficial motto of the new galactic civilization. The Empire spent 12,000 years trying to eliminate chaos from the galaxy, but chaos is not the enemy of order. Chaos is the creative force that makes order worth having.